Welcome. Good afternoon, everyone. I am Shadi Salehi. I am the director of the Trust-Based Philanthropy Project and thrilled to be with you all this afternoon for a very hot topic, trust-based compliance. If you are joining us just now, please make sure you are on mute. You are welcome to have your camera on. We would love to see your faces. We have a lot to cover today, so thank you for bearing with us. We've got over 300 people registered too. So as folks arrive, please just settle in, take in what you can. We're gonna jump right in. So we are really delighted today to have a fabulous group of speakers. We've got the representation and perspective of the CFO, the lawyer, the auditor, and the tax experts. These are our fabulous speakers. You will hear from them in just a couple minutes. I will be throughout our discussion just reminding you who we're hearing from as we're going through the discussion, just to ground you a bit. And again, if you are just joining us, please make sure to mute yourselves as you arrive. So our goals for today are to take the fear out of audits and compliance. That is the first and foremost goal.
And
please do mute yourself as you're arriving.
With the values component.
We also want to show what's possible when a CFO, an auditor, a tax expert, and an attorney collaborate to advance a trust-based vision. And ultimately, we want to inspire some creative thinking about how we can partner effectively with the experts to build compliant and trust-based practices. So you'll be hearing examples of that throughout the day or throughout the program. We are not here to offer legal and tax advice. Just to be clear, this is not a legal advice session, although we will share the contact info of all of our speakers after the program so that you can, if you have very specific advice you'd like to seek out, you will have access to reaching out to our speakers. We're also not here to answer nuts and bolts questions about legal compliance. We did a previous session on legal compliance in a trust-based context. I will be dropping a resource into the chat box later, and we'll also include it in the follow-up email for the program that has a lot of those basic legal questions answered. So we will be pursuing that, or we will be sharing that with you after this. So we do have some tools for that. And we're also not here to provide a deep dive into what it means or what it looks like to operationalize trust-based practices. So again, we've got other programs that we've done on that, and we will invite you to join us for future programs on that topic. So just a refresher, trust-based philanthropy is an approach to giving that addresses the inherent power imbalances that exist between funders, nonprofits, and the communities they serve. And at the core, trust-based philanthropy is about redistributing power in service of a healthier and more equitable nonprofit ecosystem. So practically, this includes a number of grant-making principles that you have probably heard of before. And here they are, the 6 principles of trust-based philanthropy. Again, we will not be diving deep into these principles in today's discussion, but this is just a refresher for you of what it is that the elements are of a grant-making approach that is fully trust-based. We'll hear a story, the main story we'll be sharing today, we'll dive into unrestricted funding and simplified paperwork, which tend to be the areas where compliance questions come up the most. So that's good news that we will be investing some time speaking about that. And that is our quick and dirty recap of trust-based philanthropy. I wanted to run through that relatively quickly so that we could have some time to really engage in the question that we're here to discuss. And without further ado, I would love to introduce you to Mynor Veliz, the CFO of the Headwaters Foundation in Montana. And Mynor, who really kind of came up with the idea for this session, has done a lot of work as the CFO at Headwaters Foundation, really driving a vision that is fully compliant and fully trust-based. So Mynor, I would love to start with you and really for the focus of today's discussion. Headwaters Foundation is becoming really known for its GO grants. And this is an innovative model that approves grants within 24 hours and can cut a check to grantees within 7 to 10 days. Mynor, please take it away and share with us why this approach has become a priority for Headwaters and how you've been able to make that vision a reality.
Thank you, Shadi. Hello, everyone. It's so great to be here, and not only me, but the team that is presenting today is pretty cool. The accent is not fake. I'm original from Guatemala, and I live in Montana. And one of the things that I got hired to be part of CFO of this organization in 2017, and I don't know if you guys know my boss, Brenda Solorzano, but Brenda is just amazing, and she has worked in philanthropy for many years, and I think she has seen a lot of the stuff in philanthropy that, to her analysis and experience, didn't work. And one of those things I think was the red tape, the traditional philanthropy utilized as a gatekeeper. I think you have heard the term many times. I don't come from philanthropy. I come from Fortune 500. My background is I used to work for Caterpillar. I used to work for Starbucks. I was the finance lead for all the drive-through business in Starbucks. So all of us customer centric and being able to have efficiencies in the things that we do. I'm for good or bad. I'm responsible for you seeing in a Starbucks in the past, you used to go and order something that's right through and you have text, and now is image, because we understood that people can order faster, quicker, if you provide them with an image of what they're supposed to be ordering, and no offerings, especially in the peak time, in order for you to get your coffee. You just care about your coffee at 7 in the morning and how we can get that client at 7 in the morning with what they want. Like, you're not going to be trying any new drinks at 7 in the morning. So that was my background. And then after that, I got hired to work in healthcare, and I became the CFO of Planned Parenthood. And from then on, all my work in healthcare started. And then I started applying a lot of the learning from Fortune 500 efficiency and customer centric to healthcare. And I became really successful in my jobs as a CFO, working closely with the operation team and the technology team. And when I got hired, this is when everything started. So when I got hired, and Brenda sat me down and said, like, listen, I am thinking about a different type of philanthropy, a different type of organization. She's like, I moved all the way from San Francisco to Montana, and I'm not going to be doing the same. So she's like, they hired me to do something different, and that's what I'm planning to do. And I was like, okay. I didn't have any background in the process of philanthropy, which is, now I understand that was really helpful. So she explained to me, she's like, listen, this is how it works when people want to apply for a grant. This is how it usually looks like. And you guys know this already. I'm a preacher to the choir. You apply, and you have to follow all the procedures that the foundation tells you, how many words, what kind of font to use, what kind of budget template, and so on and so on. Then you apply, and you wait, and you wait, and you wait. And then after you get your grant, after 6 months or 9 months, then she's like, then we want you to start as a nonprofit, start working right away. Something that was your priority 6 months ago, not now. Anyhow, so she said, I want something different. I want something that can we do something where people just apply really quickly. We do our due diligence, and that due diligence is not burdensome, and the client gets the check really quickly, and we don't get scammed. I was like, okay, so sounds great to me. Like, okay, let me think about this. And then after a while, thinking about what she was asking me, it came to my mind a visualization of, oh, so you want something that looks like applying for a credit card. And she's like, what do you mean? And I said, well, when you apply for a credit card, you have to have certain information that only you know, right? Your income, your employment, your social security number. So it requires certain specific numbers, data that nobody will have. And she's like, yes. She's like, she like that. And then the system will tell you right away if you're approved or not based on that, right? She's like, yes. And then how long does it take for you to get a credit card? She's like, a week. Next Friday, I have the credit card on my mailbox. She's like, yes. She's like, that's what I want. And I was like, okay, let's do that. Then I really quickly encountered that there's no FICO score. There's no credit score in nonprofit world. So I was like, I have this idea, but there's no FICO score, that we have to create what it would look like a FICO score. And that's how we started. So then we start developing the idea about what does the FICO score looks like for nonprofit, knowing that there's no these companies that they're tracking that kind of information right now. So we decided for us that what was important as a FICO score was, from the legal perspective, well, all these ties to the team that's here presented with me today, because I made a phone call to my auditor, and the first question was like, hey, you guys are going to be auditing us, and I want to check to make sure the way how we're doing this, you guys are cool with this. And they were like, tell me more. And our auditor was just really curious. And you will see her here. Jennifer is with us here today. And Jennifer Price was just curious. She's like, tell me more. And I explained to her what I was trying to do. She's like, well, let me connect you with our tax experts. And then they connect me with their tax experts. And I have Maggie and I have Wendy Campos with us also here. And they were like, well, are they going to be 501c3s? And so, yeah. So like, okay, you can do grants. It's like, that's it? Yeah. If they're 501c3s and you can check their 501c3s, that's great. And it's like, from the audit perspective, what do you need, Jennifer? And it's like, I just need to make sure that you know that you're checking those things, make sure that you're accounting for the money you're giving them, and you have a way to track that. And I was like, that sounds great. I can do this. So then for us, technology is your best friend, by the way. Like, I'm a big believer in technology, and there's a lady in this session here named Chantel. She runs TAG, TAG, sign up for their conference and all this stuff. These people are really great. So technology is your friend. And I started thinking, for the technology perspective, how do we solve for this? So what we created is we created a little quiz. We created a way to connect directly to the IRS database and check. Ask the technology to just check for us really quickly to if this is about 501c3 and get us a report. Great, that's done. Second thing is, like, how do we check this organization is in Montana, and specifically in the areas that we serve? Oh, let's use their zip code. So all these addresses and these zip codes are part of this thing. So let the system go and check, and they will tell you, like, yeah, it's part of our county. So then the next thing was, let's write a quiz. And that quiz was going to be 5 or 6 questions, really easy to answer, because we believe that most people will tell you the truth. And then we use also in a study from Harvard Business School about when people would cheat less in taxes if you ask them to sign the contract first. So then we ask people to sign the contract first and say, you agreeing that by filling up this contract, you're going to tell us all the things that you're telling us are true. And then we ask 5 or 6 questions really easy about, again, confirming what was the county, confirming if they were doing the work that we wanted to support. And after they did that, they got pre-approved. And when they got the pre-approved, a lot of information transfer, and they were able to complete the application right away. And now they were in our system. And then what I wanted was the approval automatic, but we were not ready for that. So we created still a human interaction into that process, but we created a balance scorecard. So that scorecard, we're able to really quickly put those buckets into approve, no, and maybes. So in that way, we only have to check the maybes, because all the yeses that were fulfilling the stuff, the requirements that we did. Anyhow, it was just really cool. So then we have been doing that, and then after we get an approval, we put the information into our system. We do ourselves, put it in the system. We put it into a special software that we have to pay vendors that we use to pay grants, and we send a check. And right now what we have is that the process takes 20 to 25 minutes to apply, 24 hours to 48 hours to get approval, and 72 hours for the check to be created, and they will receive the check in 5 or 7 days.
Wow. That's, every time I hear you tell that story, it's really exciting. So let's just back up a little bit. So this has been, applying the process that is used for credit card approval, applying that in a grant context, which is really brilliant and innovative. And the process also is allowing for really limiting the amount of time grantees are spending, and automating approvals based on zip code and based on 501c3 status. So could you talk a little bit more, Mynor, about how you worked with the auditor, the tax experts, and lawyers? What were the conversations like? What did you need to make sure was compliant? And I'm also curious, how did the board feel about this? Did your board raise questions that you had to bring back to your legal and tax teams to get some clarity or confirmation that this was going down the right track?
Great question. So I think the first one, let me start this from the board perspective, because I feel that sometimes that can be a roadblock inside the organization. And what was great about our board was that our CEO was already preparing them to be like, we're going to do this, a different type of philanthropy. And in our case, we get approval for a budget at the beginning of the year and a work plan. And the work plan will highlight how much money we're going to spend on different categories on grant making. And then we do the operations of the money, the grant making of the money. And by the way, that was the important question that the auditor was asking. The auditor was asking, how does your board is going to approve those grants? Because it will be good for us to know that you're staying under the guardrails of your board. And I said, that's great. And I asked, in this case, Jennifer Price, and I say, would an annual plan work for you? And she's like, yeah, if you can consistently produce the annual work plan that tells us specifically amounts that the board is approving, then you're good. And I say, what happens if during the year we go and ask for more money? She's like, make sure that you have the minutes. That way we will audit you, then we will see what they got approved first. And then if it was any additional, then that's the documentation that we need to make sure that you're staying again in the guardrails that your board gave you. And the board was okay with it. The biggest pushback that we received, it was from grantees. The grantees were the ones that were worried. They were like, whoa, you want to do what? Like, no, people are going to steal your money. Like, no, like that's too much money. Originally, we wanted to do $10,000. And because of all the pushback, we were like, we kind of start getting nervous. It's hearing grantees saying no, or be careful. And then we went down to 5,000. And it was really interesting to me that to understand the fear that they had. Then we start creating what we have called the nice list and the naughty list, like Santa Claus. So I was like, well, how about we create two lists? And if somebody ever goes to the naughty list, then they will never receive money from us. And we really quickly learned after we did the first year and we visit every one of those Go grantees that no one stole the money. We didn't approve one grant again, not because the person stole the money, but because the person was doing work with a section of kids that was not under the parameters that we wanted specifically, and could have been under the umbrella if you want to expand the umbrella. So we just talked to her and said like, that's great, but I think going forward, this doesn't align really well with us. So that tells you that of the original 60 grantees, we didn't renew the grant, the Go grant. 59 used the money the way they said they were going to use the money for general operating expenses. And they also learn really quickly that if you want to be a scammer, there are quicker ways and cheaper ways to be a scammer than opening a nonprofit, finding a board, and applying for a 501c3 status.
Okay, Mynor, there are a lot of questions coming in for you. So I'd like to kind of wrap some of them into bundles so you can address them. First, can you describe the average grant amount and the grant length of these grants? And these are all majority Montana based, correct?
That's correct. We have 15 counties, and this is one program. So we have 4 programs, different type of steps. Today, we're talking about what we call Go grants or general operating grants. So they make sure that if you have any questions related to that program, but there are other programs that we offer that it might differ a little bit in the way how we do it.
And another question that's coming in is, well, one, I just want to confirm this is indeed an open application process, correct? It's kind of open to anyone to apply.
Oh, that's a great question, because the other thing that the answer is yes, but this is the other thing too. I also discovered that philanthropy apparently we open when you can apply, and then we close it. And I was like, why? I was like, as a client centric coming for 4 to 500, it'd be like, you can buy coffee from January to February, like, but from March, then you can buy coffee all the way until November. I was like, why? Like, why is not until the money is run out? And they were like, what happened if the money ran out in 1 month? It's like, great, we ran out in 1 month. Ask for more money then. And then I was like, oh, so we just leave it open? Yeah. So that was a big moment for us too, to be like, no timing, just leave it open. And anybody can apply. We are really clear with our requirements, if you want to call it. One of the things that was really important for us is that these GO grants go to rural Montana. So if you're not part of rural Montana, then you will not get it. And that's what is so great, because you don't want to waste any of your grantees' time. So the more clear you can be who can get these grants and who cannot, then it's going to help your grantees.
Thank you. So just to clarify, because there are questions asking, how do you know the money was spent the way it was intended to be spent? These are unrestricted grants. So there's flexibility for the nonprofit to determine how they spend those funds. So is there reporting required, Mynor, or how do they share back, or is there a mechanism in place for them to share back?
The first year, I will tell you, the first year we were interested in some kind of reporting, but not necessarily a typical report, because we didn't want to get 60 reports and not read them. And as we know, sometimes we do that. What was really important for us was building the relationship and getting to know our grantees. Because also, what is so cool about the GO grants is that also becomes a way for us to meet some nonprofits that can be part of a larger, bigger work for a strategic initiative, which is a more complex and system changes approach. So sometimes we might know only the loud voices in town, if you want to call it that, but there might be a organization that's doing really great work, but we don't know about them. And to GO grant, we get to know them. So the first year, we literally, the whole team went and divided the 60 grantees, and we went and visited them. And we went and talked to them and got to know them. And that's how we report back. And through the interview, we took notes, we came back, and we entered the information into the system. And we got to know them. And we took some pictures.
I love that example, because it's also signaling that this initial unrestricted investment is an opportunity to build relationship with grantees. It becomes a doorway to build relationship, learn from grantees, kind of continue to learn about their work, identify opportunities to, bring them into other grant making buckets where they might be able to receive more funds. So in a lot of ways, this is a relationship building grant. And I want to remind those on the call today, when you unrestrict this, and it was all done, as you hear, fully compliant, it opens up so many opportunities to approach the grantee relationship differently. So I really want to underscore that. And then that opens up opportunities to continue to do the homework, what Mynor is describing, going and meeting with grantees, hearing about what's happened, building that relationship. So those are key elements. I want to come back to another practical question that's come up, and then we're going to hear from our experts too, because they can address a lot of these more technical questions that are coming. But Mynor, how were you able to get so many checks out the door in such a short time? What has that impact been on you and your team, just operationalizing, just signing and getting checks out the door? What did that look like?
It's all about technology. It's all about technology. One of the things that also Brenda, another mandate I would say that came from Brenda when she hired me, she said, I want this organization to be paperless. She's like, whatever you have to do, make this paperless. I don't want to be dealing with paper. That's what I come from. And I was like, okay. So then I started looking really quickly. Well, first, we started looking for the software to run grants. And we got fired by 2 vendors. When we started telling what we wanted to do, the vendors were like, we're out. We can't do that. We never done that. And we appreciate that, because I feel like we will have wasted a lot of money with our grant management vendor if we wanted to. They will tell us yes to get our money and hit the roadblock. So we found a vendor that was willing to do all the process for us. The way the process of all the different grants, the way we wanted to develop that. The question was, remind me again. I just lost my train of thought.
How did you manage to get checks out the door so quickly?
Yeah. So then what we did is like we have right now 4 different softwares, and 3 of them talk to each other directly. And that's really important to me because then that creates time for us to do additional work, including what we're doing today, these kind of sessions. Otherwise, I would not have time for this. So we have our software for the grants. Then we have, I found a software that is used specifically to pay vendors. So whenever you have your vendors and you're buying from them, you're buying from them and you have to pay them the bills, they can submit their invoice through that. So I was like, so this can work to pay grants. And we have been using Build.com. So then every time there's a grant that gets approved, gets entered into the system. And this is what is so beautiful because my auditor will ask me, she said, how are you going to track who is approving those grants? And I say, oh, I have a solution for that. I have Build.com, and Build.com tells me who entered the check for the approval, goes to the program director real easily. She sees all the checks that they got in that from her program officers that grants have been approved, goes to her, she approves that. Then it goes to my CEO, which most of the time you don't get CEOs involved with that. And for us, because it's so easy, shows up with her, she goes and approves them, and then I pay. So we have an even more stringent or strict process to approval process that whenever my auditor comes and says, hey, I want to do a test in these checks, and I wanted to show me all the audit trail of those checks, I don't have to go to any file cabinets. I go like, happy to do that for you. Pull out the software, find the check, print all the detail, make it into, not print, but make a PDF of that component and send it to my auditors. And my auditor is happy to because I don't have to be scanning and sending her paper, but she can just see in one PDF who entered, all the people who approved, who paid the check, and when the check was cashed.
Wow. Okay. Well, that's awesome. I think it's time for us to hear from the auditor, Jennifer Price, who is on the line. Mynor, there's a lot more questions coming up on about specifics on technology and things like that. There are a number of Headwaters staff also on the call, so they're doing their best to answer those very specific questions. But Jennifer, I want to turn to you. One, just as an auditor, just for those who might be a little newer to this, because I had to get some refreshers on the different roles. Working as an auditor to foundations and nonprofits, one big part of your job is to make sure your clients are following what's called generally accepted accounting principles, or what's called GAAP. What does that mean, and how does that apply in this story around the Go grants?
Yes, thanks, Shadi, and pleasure to be here today. Hello, everyone. So what does that mean? So as you said, the audit's purpose is really to give an opinion on whether the financial statements are materially correct in accordance with US GAAP, which is what we follow. But what does that really mean? Well, are the numbers in the financial statements materially correct? Are they accurate? And are those disclosures accurate? But really beyond that, are they really telling the foundation story? Are they transparent? Are they putting out what the foundation really wants to say about their organization in compliance with GAAP, with the rules and regulations? And so what that means for kind of what we've done with Headwaters and in working with Mynor and his team, we focused on a couple of different areas. I'll keep it on grants here today for our discussion. And really looking at when they make those grants, if it's an unconditional grant, is it being recorded accurately in the financial statements? So are there conditions? Is it a multi-year grant, or is it unconditional? When was it awarded? So when does it get recorded? And so we spent a lot of time in this area in really working with Mynor and his team on what are all the various types of grants you're making? What are the buckets? So looking at the GO grants and the other programs and initiatives the foundation was focusing on, and really making sure that the foundation had policies and procedures in place and internal controls in order to make that happen. And so what's really been great about working with Headwaters is really, well before, I think more than a year before they had their first audit, we began working with them and really focused on internal controls and policies and procedures. And we really wanted to partner with the foundation and make sure that they had policies in place, that they had strong internal controls for a couple of reasons. One, yes, to have clean audits, to stay in compliance, to be sure they didn't have any issues in their audit, but also to be able to achieve their mission the way they wanted to, and to avoid any sort of internal control issues, to have clean management letters. And so it was really great working with Mynor out of the start, because they really understood this and embraced it, and really saw us as a trusted advisor. And so we were able to assist them with developing early on those policies and procedures. We did some early testing just to see how things were working, and we made some recommendations, and they implemented all of them. They established great policies, great controls. Mynor talked a little bit about authorizations and approvals. We really wanted to be sure, again, for a couple of reasons, that the grants were authorized. Were they authorized by the appropriate individual or the board, whatever the process was, and was there documentation of that? That not only keeps you having a clean audit, but it keeps the foundation safe, and it can prevent problems or issues. And so we wanted to ensure that grant agreements were accurate and really covered what was intended. That gets a little bit more into legal, but we were really looking at those grant agreements to ensure that how they would have to account for them was what they really intended. And so we spent a lot of work well before the first audit in getting all of that in place and helping them with that. And they just really embraced it and developed a lot of strong internal controls, which I think just continues to help them today. We also focused on really looking at what they were using the funds for. Were those initial contributions donor restricted? Were there endowments? So kind of really keeping them in compliance with all things GAAP, and just making sure that they could really do their mission the way they wanted to, and focus on that, so that once their policies are in place, the controls were strong, all they have to do is execute and not focus on that day after day. So they could really focus on what it is they want to do, which is their mission. And so I think, it's just been great working with them and their team, because they really embrace this. I know in our field, we run into a lot of organizations that really do see the audit as sort of a got ya, trying to find problems or issues and just come in sort of like the enemy. And that's not the case at all from our perspective. And Mynor and his team certainly did not approach it that way. We're here to help. We want to be keeping you safe and ahead of what's coming. So our goal is to really alert them of what's coming down the pipeline, what regulations are coming, and how will it impact them. And so again, so they can focus on their mission, and we're there to keep them in compliance at the end of the day. And so it's just been a great partnership, a lot of collaboration with the others on the call, which I'll let them speak about, but really a team effort is how it should be. And this is what makes the best relationships with us and our clients, and really enables us to help them in the way that we can.
Thanks, Jennifer. There is one question. Well, first of all, I just want to note, there's a lot of love among these partners that have worked together around this. And this is we talk about building trust-based relationships with grantee partners. This conversation is about building trust-based relationships with your auditors, with your tax experts, with your attorneys, with your CFOs, among all these relationships. So I hope that you're kind of picking up on some of that. Jennifer, before we move on to hear from Wendy and Maggie, there is a question that came in. What is an auditor's perspective on reviewing applicants' financial information? Is that something that you care about, or something that you look for?
It's not really in the scope of the audit to actually look at that underlying information, but what is in the scope of the audit is that they are following their own policies and procedures. And so we do look to ensure that if the board approves a grant and there are certain criteria, are they doing that? And is there documentation? So not so much in that we're not evaluating the grantees, we are evaluating, is the foundation doing what is in their policy in accordance with the board, what's been adopted by the board or CEO. And so we're ensuring that they are following what their policies are. Now, I will add though, if something came to our attention that we thought they should be doing or considering, we would certainly point that out. That's all part of what we're here to do. But we're really looking at, I mean, once they've set their policy, you know, our tax team really looks at sort of who the grants are going to, but I will say, you know, we're certainly pointing out anything we can and a lot of best practices that we see working with other foundations, but we're not evaluating the grantees. That's really, really not in the scope of the audit.
That is a helpful clarification. And let's hear from the tax team. We've got Wendy Campos and Maggie Elliott here on the line. So Wendy and Maggie, you work as tax experts and consultants to many foundation clients. How is your role different from the auditor's role? Can you explain for us?
Yes, I'll go ahead and start out. Thank you, Shadi. Jennifer just alluded to it a little bit already. So first of all, with tax, there's no materiality. And Headwaters in particular being a private foundation, there do tend to be more restrictive rules, in particular around who you can easily, I will say easily give to, and who maybe you can still give to, but you've got a little more work involved as a foundation. Want to stay out of the weeds, but that's kind of just a high level way to kind of frame that. I know there's been questions in the chat about were these 501c3 public charities? What if they were international? You know, we have talked to Headwaters recently about expenditure responsibility, additional due diligence, but for sake of, again, staying out of the weeds, I won't go into that in detail for today's presentation. But we really, again, there's no materiality. We are looking as part of the compliance process at each grantee, confirming it, you know, or looking at the information that Headwaters has already confirmed to confirm that they were a qualified public charity and that it meets the exempt purpose of the foundation, those types of things. But I think the other piece that's always missing with the tax folks is we also want to be creative and try to help. We don't just want to say, no, Mynor and Brenda, this just isn't going to work. We also want to be able to have conversations that are collaborative with Headwaters, with legal counsel, and with Jennifer and her team as the audit team. And Jennifer also alluded to, and so did Mynor, there'll be times where maybe Mynor will reach out to Jennifer as a starting point because it seems like maybe it's just an accounting question, but Jennifer's really good of bringing the whole team together because we know there's usually probably a tax aspect as well, especially with the private foundations. And then I often want to pull in Saskia on the legal side because we have similar experience and knowledge on some of the tax regulations and specifics. And so I see the best way to collaborate and the best way to provide value to Headwaters to have us all have our thinking caps on. It just really brings the best results for our clients. And that's what I've really enjoyed with Headwaters is Mynor really embraces that. So does Brenda. And I think this presentation today and speaking to all of you is a testament to that. But I would say high level, that's the biggest difference. You know, we have a lot more small dollars could matter for tax compliance. But I'll let Maggie talk a little bit as well to add some context. And as you can see, tax is so important. We needed two people here to talk about the tax side because there is no materiality. So, you know, we can spend all day probably talking about it.
Thank you, Wendy, and thank you, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here today to talk to all of you with the Headwaters team leading this. But speaking to the Go grants specifically, I just wanted to highlight, you know, that when Mynor reached out about those, we really just go back to the code and see what is required, what is legally required, and what's the minimum that you need to do to, you know, remain compliant and give out those grants and serve the community as you wish. So as long as we were able to make those check boxes and make sure that, you know, they had really the key importance here was verifying that they were all 501c3 public charities in good status. That was all enough to make us feel comfortable with this specific project that they were going to be able to give those out without agreements and additional burden, and quickly be able to serve, the people that they wanted to.
We've gotten a couple questions about if it's an organization that is a fiscally sponsored project of a 501c3. How did that factor in, or were any of the grant recipients projects of a 501c3?
That's a very good question. Mynor, do you have anything to add in how you set that up for the Go grant specifically, or if that was something that was addressed?
Yeah, we do have a fiscal sponsor grantees. I think there was a question that came out even before this that is related to whenever the grantee is doing lobbying, and I'm not going to address that. And we do have a solution for that, by the way. If you're interested, just reach out to us after, because as soon as that came in, guess who I talked to? I talked to my lawyer, and my lawyer says like, yep, I was just working on one of those. So we have a solution for that. But overall, again, it's communication, right? Like, I get to know my grantees. We need to know, in this case, sometimes we find a fiscal sponsor for our grantees. Be like, you haven't got your 501c3 yet, but we know what you're doing, and it's important to our mission. Here, work with this organization. They can be the organization that can be your fiscal sponsor. So we don't have any problem with that. I think it gets really tricky when it's the question about lobbying. I would tell you that, again, our grantees understand that, and as Saskia has educated us over and over, the reason of a contract in the past is to communicate, right? So that's why you end up with this contract that are 20 or 30 pages. The only problem is the only person who can understand those are the lawyers. So in reality, the purpose is useless, but that's the only reason of a contract. So if you're able to communicate verbally with your grantees, then your contract can be really little, because you only have to talk about specific things that you want to emphasize or highlight, but everything else has been discussed. I'd be like, hey, use the money how you see fit. It's for general operating expenses, and let us know. Thank you for letting us know that you need new computers. Seems like you're going to use it for new computers. Have a great day. So again, it's just communication, and we don't have any problem using fiscal sponsor. We don't have that many, but we have a few.
Thank you, Mynor. And we did, for the Trust-Based Philanthropy Project, did a primer on some of these legal questions that addresses the fiscal sponsor question. I'll make sure that all of you get that in the follow-up email to this. I do want to come back to, before we lose Wendy and Maggie, because I want to bring Saskia up. Her name has been mentioned quite a bit. She's the attorney. But Wendy and Maggie, what were the questions, or what were some of the questions, or not even necessarily concerns, but new things you had to consider, or things that you really wanted to be sure were compliant in this Go Grants model? What were the types of questions you were raising, or things that you had to be mindful of?
Well, I think one of the, the biggest, most common is, how are you going to ensure through the technology you're going to utilize and the quickness of the process, how are you going to make sure that these are 501c3 public charities, and that they haven't had status revoked, for example, that they possibly don't have their IRS determination letter yet, that they're not an international or foreign organization. So how are you going to make sure that the technology, you feel comfortable that the technology is going to cover that basis? And one thing I'll say about Headwaters is there was a situation that came up where they did have a potential grantee whose status was revoked. They didn't even know it was revoked. They learned it through the process of applying for funds, and the foundation really wanted to help that organization. So they got on the phone with us with that organization, not so they could necessarily try to find a way to give to them currently, but let's help them so they can come back in the future and we can help them, because we want to see them succeed. They fit the criteria otherwise. So that's the other thing that I really think. There's been collaborative efforts that don't just benefit Headwaters. They're ultimately benefiting their mission, because they're benefiting those organizations in the community that maybe just somehow slip through the compliance cracks, if you will.
Anything to add to that, Maggie, before we move on to Saskia?
No, I think the only other, thing that I was going to add is that, when you start to really understand what the mission is and what the purpose is at the end that you're trying to achieve, like it was with the Go Grants, the questions, are fairly simple, and you could definitely pave a path to get there. And again, like everyone's been saying today, Mynor is just fantastic at bringing the right people to the table when needed and asking the right questions. So he really makes this process very easy.
Well, thank you both. We hopefully will be able to bring you back in for questions. Next, want to turn it to Sasuke De Boer, who is an attorney at Stoel Rives, and the attorney expert who worked with this team. Saskia, can you help us understand, as the legal expert here, how does your role complement the auditor and the tax experts in this context?
Yeah. Well, a couple of years ago, I described my role as being the grease and the glue, and that is something I have held on to and continue to repeat, because I think that describes what it is that I do and how that is that complementary piece with the program team, the audit, and the tax team. So it's looking where we need to find places to really stick and looking where there might be some friction and figuring out how to really smooth that out. And so it's braiding really all of these different themes together. And in doing that, I think this goes back to the Brenda and Mynor philosophy too of all of this, is not siloing each of our different pieces. And so the fact that you have all of us here together on the phone or on Zoom is an example of that. We're not saying this is a tax issue, this is a compliance issue. It is a how do we work together and get this done opportunity. And so really, how do we reframe it in that way? And how do we work together to really try to construct something? I think too, the not siloing piece comes up in the piece of not siloing everything to say what has to be in the agreement, but what does the entire life cycle look like? And what do we need to communicate, as Mynor said, to the grantee? What information do we need and when? And what do we need in our records? And from all of those components of tax, compliance, audit, and legal, let's look at that as an entire life cycle and make sure that we put all of that together. So I think that's part of my role, is looking at program, tax, compliance, audit, and the legal pieces, and thinking about how to braid the different pieces together in an overarching life cycle to make sure we cover the basis and making sure we aren't siloing things which might cause additional issues and additional complexities, but to break those down.
That's really helpful perspective. I know that we have a number of in-house attorneys on the line. So I think that advice is really useful to really think about de-siloing these kind of roles that have been kind of historically siloed. So can you share a bit, I think across all of your perspectives, you've all really reinforced trying to hold and maintain the vision that Headwaters brings on wanting to advance trust-based relationships with grantees. That has been the beacon, I think, that has informed so much of your guidance and advice and creative thinking. What was your reaction to that, Saskia, that vision? And did it raise legal questions and concerns for you, given that it is kind of different from traditional ways grants are made in philanthropy?
You know what, I remember well the first call I had with Mynor, because I think I was giddy at the end of it. And I think it was in part because, again, he wasn't calling to say, what are the legal issues with this, right? He was saying, how can we work together to make this happen? This is our vision. This is what we want to do. Join the team. And I think, Shadi, you mentioned this earlier in saying how really this team of folks and Mynor's leadership is trust-based with this as well. So it's trust-based philanthropy looking outwards for grantees, but also for us as a team overall. And so I think in thinking that through too, one key thing we thought about was, let's really talk about the different types of programs and different types of grants that you want to do. And like those on the phone, I also was an in-house counsel to a foundation previously, so I know the goals too of saying, let's have as few of templates as we can have. But then also you want to make sure that you're not creating so few that you're putting everything into one document that doesn't have to be there. So for example, the GO grants, we have a limited pool of folks who can apply for those. Let's make sure we're in tune with that. Wendy mentioned that we're looking at expenditure responsibility. Somebody mentioned something about fiscal sponsors. Let's then address those as well. So let's not create an extra burden where we don't need to have that burden. And so I think that was also a large part of conversation and give and take, and really thinking this through, again, overall, in an overall system about how do we create this Goldilocks structure so we get the right due diligence, we do the right work, and we have the right things communicated in the right form and in the right time to the different grantees.
Wow, that's awesome. I hope that this is giving some inspiration to those of you on the line. We've got about 9 minutes. And I'd love to just spotlight all of our speakers back on the screen. If Sarah behind the scenes can help us with that. Thank you, Sarah. Just so you can kind of take in our expert panel here. And I would invite any final kind of questions that you have. Obviously, we can't get to them all. And so please do chat those into the chat box. But I do want to kind of lead with a question for you, Mynor. For funders who want to embrace more trust-based practices in their organizations, but are maybe hitting some resistance due to compliance concerns, what would you advise them?
I would tell you a story. Hopefully that story reflects a little bit about the advice, intrinsic advice to that. So first, I want to say, before I say a story, is like, you hear us talk about trust-based philanthropy, and sometimes it sounds like, I don't know, like a nilly-willy thing. And that's how it sounded to me in the beginning, to be honest with you. And then we realized that in reality, we are more, our due diligence process is really thorough. But the difference is that we don't put the burden in the grantee. We put the burden in us. And because the burden is in us, we're smart enough to know that we wouldn't want to do that manually. So we use technology to help us do the due diligence. So we don't have time in this session, but happy to connect with anybody if you want to know all the stuff that we do behind the scenes to make sure that all these people that you see in this screen are happy with us, and that we are happy, and the IRS also is happy with us, and all the legal compliance. But the story that I want to tell you is the first year. We get a request. Our grant was the first year was up to $5,000. Now they are up to $7,500, but it was $5,000 per year. We get a grantee that applies only for $2,500. We're like, because we also learned that people were applying for $4,995 and $999 because they thought they had an advantage, because that's what we have taught them, that if you have an advantage, you get a grant. And we were like, what's going on? So this grantee asked for $2,500. And we look at each other as like, $2,500. And it was a school. And it was elementary school. And we're like, well, that's what they asked for. It. They qualify, give it to them. And we did. $2,500 went out of the door. A week later, they had that $2,500. We didn't hear from them. A few months later, we got a letter. And in the letter, the school principal told us that the reason why we asked for $2,500 is because we had a broken oven in our kitchen that was costing $1,800, and the labor was going to be $700. So they needed $2,500 to put a new oven. And because of the $2,500, now more than 60 kids were able to get a warm lunch that they haven't had a warm lunch for 3 or 4 months. And it's like what is that? Like, what is the return on investment in that? What is the ROI? So that's what I call that. What is the ROG? What is the return on good, right? Because we don't have a metric for return on good yet. And we would love to develop that, because the only way right now, we have discussed this with my CEO, and she's in tune with this, is that the only time we are referring to ROI is when we talk about investments. When we talk to the work that we do, it's a different return. And we haven't figured out the metric yet, even though we have metrics and we have a really, that's another thing too. If you want to know our theory of change and all the metrics that we have, it is absolutely fantastic. But there's this thing that we always are puzzle for us. How do you measure that return on good? How do you measure 60 kids getting a warm meal versus a cold sandwich, right? So I will tell you that in traditional philanthropy, this is a perfect example where this school will not qualify because they were asking for a physical thing that was for the kitchen. We don't support that, right? We support if you want books, if you want something for the students, it's program, right? We will support that. But in oven, you don't qualify. So I would just say, reach out to people, reach out to us. We're here. All this team is here at your disposal. We're open book in Headwaters. Our CEO has created this organization a way that I have time to do this, and created that we don't have to be putting decades of reports together for a board. That way we have time to go and talk to grantees and help them. So I encourage you, just try to figure out where the opportunity is to liberate yourself and of all this burden that you have right now in front of you and your desk, and it still be compliance and still do the step that you have to do, have clean audits and have a clean IRS, a compliance, and whatever you want to call it, and make your lawyers happy. All that can be done, and still you can be efficient and effective.
Thank you, Mynor. You're reminding us too that as funders, you hold a lot of power. There's resources at your hands, at your fingertips. You have the ability to take on some of those burdens. You have the access to technology. Those are huge things to remember when we look at the power imbalance that exists between funders and nonprofits. So in our remaining time, I would love to hear from our other speakers. And maybe Saskia, we'll start again with you, especially with the attorneys on the line or those who are, in-house counsel. What's one kind of piece of advice for those who are wrestling with questions around trust-based legal compliance?
Yeah, I think, push yourself, right? I think reach out to others. That could include those who are further along in the journey, like Mynor, or those who have done this before. And it absolutely also means talking with others like this type of team with audit and finance and program and putting heads together. And so really making sure that you have folks together at the team to think things through, to also think about, again, the overall process, not piece by piece, but how different pieces of the process together can make the whole that you really need to make this work. Love that.
Wendy, next to you. I know that's a big question, but one piece of advice for those who might be wrestling with the IRS compliance stuff when it comes to trust-based.
I think similar to what Saskia said, just, we want you to be in compliance, obviously, as consultants and advisors, but we can also be creative as well. And we want to, what's the end goal? And how can we help you get there? And are there other ways you could go about it and still accomplish the goal that you're wanting to accomplish?
Yes, start with the end goal. Thank you. Maggie, anything to add to that from a tax perspective?
The one thing I just wanted to add, and I think that just echoes everything that's been said today, is work with your teams together. It's much more efficient to get us all in one room, even though it seems like a lot of heads, and get something resolved. We often have, 10, 15-minute calls with Mynor just to talk through an issue or a question, and it's just super efficient and it just gets the job done.
Thank you, Maggie. And then turning to you, Jennifer, with the auditors' final words for our group today.
Yes, nothing really different than what the others have said. I think just reach out and talk and share your goals. Sometimes clients will call us and really want to ask it and keep it within the audit or the accounting, but we really want to know the broad picture, and we need to know, because that can spark creativity, further collaboration if we really know the whole picture, if we know what you're trying to do. And so I just, as others have said, don't be afraid to ask and pull others in the room. We all know the best thinking comes from collaboration, diverse minds, you're going to get a better result than keeping it in silos. So I would just say reach out. We're here to help. We're not here to point out problems and issues. We're here to help you get in front of them and prevent them.
I love this. I love the love on the screen. When we all huddled to prep for this call, you should have seen how everyone's faces lit up when they got to see each other. This is true embodiment of trust-based relationships. It extends beyond the funder-grantee relationship. Thank you all. Thank you to the Headwaters team for the amazing vision that drove all of this. And thank you, Saskia, Wendy, Maggie, Jennifer, for adding your expert advice. And thank you all for being here with us today and bearing with us with not being able to answer all your questions. We will follow up with more. And if you want another program on this, let us know. We will maybe we'll do a part 2. It seems like there's a lot of energy for that. So with that, thank you, everyone. Have a great rest of your day. Thanks again. Take care, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.